I've spent 18 years in corporate. I've had 7 mental health spirals and I've had 6 burnouts. There's a difference between what decisions you can make by yourself versus what decisions you can tentatively make and actually need a rubber stamp from someone more senior than you.
The org chart tells you who owns the function, but the uncomfortable decision tells you who owns the authority.
I'm absolutely great at absorbing pressure until I reach a specific breaking point. If I were to keep doing this for the next 5 years, what is life going to look like?
Hi, Victor. Welcome. Before we start with formalities, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here with you, Marco. So a little bit about my background. I've spent the last 18 years in corporate Australia. So Australia has been my home since I was born. I spent a lot of time in the banking and wealth management spaces. At about halfway in between, I started running a coaching business and then went back to my corporate role. And now I'm currently out in my coaching business again, helping people build their own personal brands, become known for what they know and what they do.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation because it started with something you said to me privately that was more interesting than most polished leadership content, right? You said companies talk a lot about empowering people, but when the culture and the environment actually don't support that, decisions keep moving up, right, and getting stuck. And I think a lot of people will recognize that because you can have a title, you can have a team, but when the decision becomes risky, political, expensive, or uncomfortable, you suddenly discover how much authority you really have, right? And that's not only an organizational problem. Over time, it becomes a human problem. So let's start with your original observation. When you said decisions kept going up and getting stuck, what did you actually observe and how did it actually look like in ordinary daily work?
So a bit of context there is I've been at a large bank, Westpac in Australia, which is one of the big 4 banks in Australia. They turn over about $9 billion a year, so 35,000 organization. And I would be at the top of middle management or the bottom of senior management, depending on if you have a glass half full or glass half empty approach. And my title was as an executive manager, and I had a team of 10. And then, there were layers above me. And when I made that comment, I was just reflecting on the fact that on paper, I had all of these outcomes that I need to achieve. I've got these responsibilities. I've got, appropriate decision-making authority. And it doesn't change the fact that when things go wrong, or if it's slightly political, or if it's slightly risky, that I would need to do my due diligence and surface up those decisions for the higher powers that be to make those decisions. And in my most previous role, it was about 5 months ago now, I was dealing with high stakes customer type situations, customers who were in vulnerable circumstances and significant customer complaints and things like that. So there was a risk of reputational damage if something went really wrong. And so when there's a risk of reputational damage, then the higher ups do want to have visibility and get involved. And so as someone that's in the middle of it, it can at times feel that no matter where you are up on the hierarchy, unless you're the top dog and you're the CEO, then there's always people that you need to surface these decisions to. So it's like the decision-making authority that you have on paper, it looks good and it sounds good and it's empowering in nature. But the reality is there's a difference between what decisions you can make by yourself versus what decisions you can tentatively make and actually need a rubber stamp from someone more senior than you.
And that's the reality in a lot of companies, right, nowadays. Because it looks that you're the decision maker on the paper, right? But actually you aren't in a lot of ways, which is interesting because nobody, in a way, nobody needs to formally say, don't make this decision, right? But the system can teach you that through what happens after somebody makes one after you, right?
Yeah, I remember there were certain times where I like to be quite autonomous. So I like to make my own decisions. And this is probably the entrepreneur in me speaking out, but the entrepreneur in me says, make decisions fast. And if something goes wrong, ask for forgiveness. I think the saying is ask for forgiveness, not permission. So I kind of operate by that. And, there were a few times even in the last 12 months where I made the decision that felt right to me based on my values and what I thought was best for the company. And later on, maybe someone sideways or adjacent to me, or maybe someone more senior to me, had a different thought. And so that feedback would come back. And so I'd think, oh, okay, so I thought on paper I had that decision-making authority, but really sometimes it is decision by consultation, decision by committee. And so exactly as you say, Marco, you learn from the environment what is actually okay to make decisions about yourself versus what isn't. And even if the piece of paper says, yep, that is within your authority, the reality can be, quite different. And you get that through the feedback mechanisms, whether it's formal or informal or side chatter or whatnot.
And there is often a gap between, in a way, permission on paper and safety in practice, right? The organization may say you own this, but the person is also calculating what happens if I'm wrong. Who will support the decision? Who will disappear when the consequences arrive, right? Because at the end, they will point the finger at you if you're wrong. But without them, you can't decide, in a way, if you're right.
Yeah. So it almost becomes this tricky sort of gamble. It's like you kind of decide which decisions will I make for myself because the risk is low enough, and which decisions do I actually need to surface up and escalate because there's a higher level of risk. And it really comes back to your own individual judgment. And, I was fortunate in a sense that when I stuffed up, my leaders backed me, and that's not always the case. When I had a team of 10, when they stuffed up in inverted commas, then I would back them. And so, yes, on the one side, you are measuring and assessing, hey, when can I make those decisions? And if I were to stuff up in inverted commas, who's going to back me? And at the same time, as a leader, you can also cultivate that environment. So if your team members make a mistake, you can make that okay. But it very much becomes a cultural thing. And I was lucky in some of my roles to have that level of safety. And that psychological safety is something that we can cultivate as leaders for our people. And that's how I ended up making it feel safer for my people to make their own decisions.
This is so important because the org chart tells you who owns the function, let's say, but the uncomfortable decision in a way tells you who owns the authority, and those are not always the same person, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it can be different people, and you kind of learn that through experience.
I want to stay with that because one bad approval process is annoying, right? But when it happens repeatedly, people learn a behavior. They stop asking what is the right decision and start asking what is the safest way to move this decision away from me. That looks like caution. It can even look like collaboration, but sometimes it's really self-protection, right?
Yeah. And that really comes back to the culture piece. It's like, when you're punished for making your own decision, so to speak, you kind of learn, hey, what is the safe way? And the safe way is to, hey, put things in writing, for example, and say, hey, here's the thing in writing, please approve. And you only take action once the 3, 4, 10 people, whoever they are, have actually approved it. And so even on paper that you're the decision maker or you're the person who's able to sign it off, in practice you learn that, hey, the safe thing to do is to let it go through the whole paper trail and get all the sign-offs from the relevant people. And that completely slows things down. And it actually has the opposite effect of empowering the people, because they learn through that process that it's not okay for them to make decisions by themselves, even though, going back to my original comment that, there's talk from the top and tone from the top to saying, hey, we want to empower you. But if the structures within the organization say you need these 6 sign-offs before you make a decision, then there's clear conflict there. And the structures are actually teaching people that, hey, it's not okay. You have to go the safe way and get those 6 sign-offs before you can actually do anything.
And in your opinion, why do smart, experienced people sometimes escalate decisions that appear completely qualified to make? Is it usually confidence, or is it that maybe too easy of an explanation? What are they protecting themselves from? Being wrong, or maybe even just being blamed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because there's an assumption there that smart people are not making the decisions because that power is being stripped away from them, or they're not able to. And so the simplistic answer in my mind is the environment has actually taught them that they're not allowed to make those decisions. And it's something that's trained into them over time. But then I look at myself as an example, and even though that conditioning and that environment is there, and I consider myself, a little bit above average in terms of smartness, I would just classify myself as tiny bit smart. I made the decision itself to make decisions because I feel like I'm capable and I'm able to make those decisions, and I'm able to do the right thing. And so I just contrast that with, what is it that I think makes people not able to do that? And I think what it comes down to is something that you mentioned, which was they're scared of the impact or the consequences, or looking bad, or being unsafe. And so psychologically, in the coaching world, there's a mantra of there's 3 universal fears: the fear of not being loved, the fear of not belonging, and the fear of not enough. And so the fear of not enough is the one that kicks in for most people, because they think, oh, maybe I don't have the capability, maybe I don't have the skills, maybe I don't have the experience. And so all they're really looking for is someone, ideally their people leader, to give them that empowerment to make those decisions, to back themselves. And a lot of the time, I think that is actually what's missing for them to be able to be a circuit breaker, so that they can stop feeling like they don't have enough capability, experience, skills, or whatever it might be. So I think at the crux of it, I think that is the thing that's missing for these people. They just don't have the right person backing them and supporting and empowering them on a real practical level, so that if they do make a mistake, that everything's going to be okay.
Because people need to take more ownership is very easy to say, right? But if someone has learned that ownership means carrying the blame without carrying the authority, the hesitation might be intelligent, especially if you're smart, right? What looks in a way like weak ownership may actually be someone reading the environment accurately, right?
Yeah, exactly. They've been in the environment for long enough. They've been around the block for long enough, and they've learned that the safe way is to not make those decisions, or to get all of the appropriate sign-offs before they make a decision, because that's what's being rewarded, and that's the safe way out.
And for you personally, how do you tell the difference between someone who is avoiding responsibility and someone who has correctly understood that the decision is not safe to make alone?
What's interesting about that question is I kind of sidestep that altogether. So if one of my team members was hesitating on making a decision, for me, it's less about, hey, are you reading the environment correctly, Marco? Or are you not reading the environment correctly? I'm more interested in, hey, Marco, I noticed I've empowered you to make this decision. Help me understand what's going on for you. such that you're not able to make this decision? What is it that's actually happening within your body or psychologically? What's going through your mind that's stopping you? And so if it's someone within my team in particular, then I would much rather have that conversation and understand what's going on for them so that they can make that decision in the future. So within my team, it's a lot easier because I've got that relationship. And then if it's a peer, that I think is when it starts getting a bit grey, because that's when you don't have that relationship where your job is actually to help them grow and prosper in their career. And so when I look at my peers, then it becomes slightly different. And if I have an existing relationship with them, then I might have that type of conversation, but in a more indirect way. And for me, it still goes back to having that conversation to understand what's going on, rather than saying, hey, you know what, you're playing it safe and you're not making decisions. Because if I go down that path, then what I find is I'm almost like judging that other person. And I feel like if I want to contribute to make the organization better and for the organization to make better decisions, then rather than blaming the system, so to speak, you know, even though I'm one person, I can actually at least help my circle of stakeholders or my circle of peers to help them make better decisions. So that's probably how I would look at it, more so than this or that kind of frame.
Because a lot of times leaders and managers see a decision coming upward and think my people lack confidence, right? But the person sending it upward may be saying, I'm not sure you will stand behind me if the result becomes uncomfortable, right? That's the trap.
Yeah.
No. So how did you personally decide which problems to absorb, which ones to escalate, and which ones to let your team own? Is it case by case? Do you have a method?
Yeah. So my ones kind of came top down. So I had a boss who had a process, and my boss said if on a weekly basis, she needed to report to her boss on the things that her boss needs to know about. And so she needed the information from me and the other leaders in her team to say, hey, these are the things that you need to know about so that you can report as needed to your boss. So effectively, there was a benchmark that says anything that hits this threshold, it's got different criteria, needs to be escalated to a general manager level, which is the equivalent to a VP. And so that sort of just flowed down. So that's how I decided what needed to flow up. In terms of what I decided I would absorb versus what I would let my team absorb, what it came down to is I was clear to my team in terms of, hey, these are the guardrails that I need to report on. So if it's like green, amber, red, if it's red, which is just below that threshold, I want all of these to come to me. But what I want from you before they come to me is I want you to apply this 1-3-1 principle. I want you to tell me what the problem is. I want you to have 3 options and then tell me what your 1 recommendation is. So 1 problem, 3 options, 1 recommendation. And then what I found over time was their decision-making authority, because they're going through this process, and then I would coach them through in terms of whatever comes up to me. Then they got better and better and better at making those decisions. So I prefer to give my team a method or a process so that they could learn the skill. And then what I noticed is they just got better and better over time, such that eventually they get to a point where they're like, this is the recommendation. I say, yes, that makes sense. So instead of spending lots of time going back and forth and understanding it, they built the skill to say, Victor, this is what I recommend and this is why.
Yeah, that makes sense. And usually it's the best way to deal with this, because there is a line I want to, in a way, explore here, because good leaders remove unnecessary pressure from their teams, right? That's part of the job. But there must be a point where protecting people becomes absorbing a system problem on their behalf, right? And from the outside, these two things can look exactly the same, right? Absorbing and protecting the team. So when does, in your opinion, supporting your team become absorbing pressure that the wider organization should have dealt with? Did you notice when you crossed that line in certain cases, or did it maybe happen slowly? Was there a moment?
Yeah. So what's coming to me is, as a leader, I would protect my team from things that were, for example, overly political. Or if it was like a system type problem, then more often than not, they would be the ones that would escalate to me and say, hey, this thing is broken, whether it's a actual IT system or if it's a process within the organization. Typically, they would come to me and say, these are the symptoms, this is what I'm experiencing. I've tried escalating, blah, 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 and it hasn't worked. Can you help jump in? And so what's coming to me, Marco, is actually, if it's something that my team wasn't able to absorb themselves, then they will escalate to me and we will have a chat about that. But when it's coming from outside, for me as a leader, what I would be doing is, if I saw something that was just broken and I knew that was going to come down and impact my team, then I actually thought that my job as a leader was to help prevent it hitting my team in the first place, to go and have those discussions with the right stakeholders who are initiating or pushing that problem down to then impact my team. So I don't know if you would classify that as absorbing pressure or protecting your team. And maybe I'm not quite understanding the nuance that you've got in your head. But I kind of felt like if these were system-wide organizational type things that were going to impact me and my team, then that's the type of conversation that I had a responsibility to have with the right people as their leader. So it's the type of thing I probably would have taken on myself.
Yeah. And did being good at handling pressure make it more likely that people gave you more of it?
Short answer is yes.
Because I
Short
feel
answer is
there's
yes.
a strange punishment for being dependable, right?
Yeah. Short answer is yes. I think when you're good at something, no matter what it is, so, Marco, if you're great at podcasting, and then someone else wants to learn how to podcast, then you know what? They might say, hey, Marco, can you help me be a better podcaster? So when you are good at something, people tend to recognize that you're good at it and give you more of it.
Hmm. Because in a way, if you handle difficult things well, so the system concludes that you have spare capacity for more difficult things. In a way, your reward for being calm during the fire is apparently a larger fire. In a way,
Yeah. I do agree. So, if you're great at putting out fires, they say, hey, Victor, there's a bigger fire. Could you also put out this fire? And you know what? I think that if you're someone that wants to grow and be a firefighter and put out fires, then that is actually a great way to learn. That is a great way to grow. Put out the small fires first. You learn from that. People see you're great at putting out fires. They give you bigger fires, and that's how you can, become known as an expert firefighter. And typically, if you're known for that, you'll get promoted through the ranks for it. And so I don't actually look at it as a negative thing at all. I actually look at it as a way that you can grow in a skill to be known for. But I think the better question is, do you actually want to be known for being a firefighter? Do you want to be known as the person who can absorb lots of pressure and be calm in those circumstances and be able to solve those problems? And I think that's a very individual and personal question. If someone hates that, then hey, they're probably in the wrong job. But if someone actually thrives on that, and I don't mind the pressure, then that might be a great way to continually grow and evolve as a person.
yeah, and it's in a way hard to remain calm because when other people are depending on you, right?
Yeah. It can be. I've got a 2-year-old, Luna. She's 2.5 now. And when she's, crying her eyes out. As much as I know that, my job as the father is to help her regulate her nervous system, because when you're under 3 years old, you don't actually have the connections in your brain to regulate yourself. So as much as I understand that, when she's crying her eyes out, it is very, very difficult to stay calm. And it's it's kind of like the firefighting kind of thing. Like, do I want to be better under pressure when she's having a hard time? Yes, I do. And so that's something I actively practice.
And when you look back on your corporate career now, what was exhausting for you that would never appear on calendar, job description, or performance review? Was it sometimes the volume of work and ability to switch off, responsibility for actual human beings? Or was there a difference between being physically tired and being tired of carrying responsibility for the whole team?
Yeah. There's a few things that I thought of, and the one biggest thing that is on the job description but probably isn't as clear until I was experiencing it a lot is, as a leader, I found that I felt like a really strong compulsion and obligation to role model the right behaviors on behalf of the organization. So the organization says, hey, here's our strategy, here's our values and behaviors. Leaders, you guys go out and execute that. And so, yes, that part of it is on the job description. But I found like, that was kind of like the hidden part that could at times be quite tiring and quite strenuous. And the reason for that is sometimes what's coming to you from above may or may not align with you as an individual personally. So there's a bit of conflict between organization and Marco as a person. And that's the tiring part, when there is some level of misalignment between what's coming to you from the top that you're supposed to communicate through to your team and your stakeholders versus how you personally feel about it. And those were the things that I found the trickiest and the ones that took the most energy out of me, because it just wasn't completely aligned.
Yeah, and this is the human side of decision load that gets missed, right? And unresolved decision does not remain inside a spreadsheet or a meeting. Somebody carries it home as well. Somebody thinks about it at dinner. You wake up rehearsing the consequences in a way, and very often that somebody is the person everyone describes as leader, handling it well, right? You've spoken publicly about burnout. When you were in it, did you understand what was happening, or did it only become clear later?
The clean version of it, I didn't understand it until later. So, I talk on my LinkedIn about how I've spent 18 years in corporate. I've had 7 mental health spirals and I've had 6 burnouts. So thankfully on the 7th mental health spiral, there wasn't a burnout, and that was really my breakthrough. And I'm so grateful for that. My people leader at the time was a guy named Chris. And, I sent him a card and a gift that Christmas. And I said, Chris, you've literally changed the trajectory of my life, because before that moment, I had multiple spirals every 2 to 3 years. And so to answer your question directly, at the time when I've had those burnouts, it was a mental health spiral combined with a burnout. And what I knew at the time was more the symptoms. I knew that my body was overly exhausted. I knew that I wasn't able to think very well. I knew that I wasn't able to complete my work tasks. I knew that I was having like analysis paralysis. I knew that my body was just completely empty on fuel. It's sort of like starting the day, each day with like 0% in your phone battery. It's like, that's how it felt. So I kind of knew what it felt physically, and I kind of knew what the impact on me as a person was. But I never really clicked that, hey, you know what, I never really distinguished between that was a mental health spiral and that was a burnout until afterwards. And it probably wasn't until like number 3 or 4, like it took me that long to sort of realize that, hey, all of these symptoms, whether it's the mental fatigue or the bodily exhaustion, was my body crying out and saying, hey, Victor, something's wrong here. And there's something completely out of alignment. And it wasn't until I was able to look back on it, I'm like, Marco, this has happened to me 6 times now. Like what is the common thread here? Like, what is it that I'm doing repeatedly over and over and over again? And my best hypothesis right now, and this is the hindsight part, is it was just misalignment. So earlier I talked about, decision making and misalignment between me as a human being and the organization. For me, and this isn't, the cause for everyone else and their burnout, but for me personally, my number one factor for my burnouts was just a misalignment between who I knew I was as a person and what I was doing in everyday life during that corporate journey. It was just not aligned.
A lot of people call it just, oh, I'm under stress. It's a difficult period. Oh, it's demanding role, right? Something I have to push through. And then they're ignoring symptoms. All of the system at work is not actually protecting them from it. Because in today's hustle culture, right, you're rewarded for being a fireman, right? And in a way, you become a bottleneck over a certain period, and it's fine while you're pushing through, but it accumulates. There's a lot of responsibility on you that the system won't absorb for you because the system got used that you're the fireman, right? And then my question is to all the people and leaders in general, what happens when that person cannot be a fireman anymore, right? When he had enough, when his kid has a birthday, right? And you need him to help you with a fire that he shouldn't even help you with, right? But you got used that he is there when you need him, right? So also I'm curious about the gap between how you appeared professionally during that period and what was happening privately for you. How wide was that gap?
It's a really interesting question because for me, it starts off as a very wide gap and then it kind of narrows and becomes like almost like the same person. And I kind of need to elaborate on that, which goes to what you just said earlier in terms of, absorbing the pressure until you're not able to absorb the pressure anymore. So the way it worked for me is, and how I eventually spiral is, I am absolutely great at absorbing pressure until I reach a specific breaking point. And then once I reach that breaking point, that is where I literally just crash and burn. Like I might not turn up to the office, for example, because I've just reached my maximum capacity and I can't do any more. And so as I'm going up and the pressure is building and building and building, the gap between me in public and me in private is quite large because I'm doing my best to keep it all together in the office, solving the problems, continuing to fight the fires. And in the background, when I get home, then that's where I would feel more mentally exhausted, where my body would start, showing aches and pains, or it would start off at simple things like colds and flus and coughing and getting sicker more frequently. And then as I get closer to the breaking point, then those signs start becoming more and more visible. So the gap actually starts shrinking until the point I collapse. And then I'm basically the same person. And they're like, hey, Victor hasn't shown up to the office for a week. What's going on? And it's because, I've just reached that breaking point. And so, yeah, it starts off as a wide gap because in the past, I was trying to keep it very private and still keep doing my best at work until I just wasn't able to. And it wasn't until my later years in life where I matured a lot as a person, where I kind of realized that if you give people the opportunity to help you, if you actually say, hey, Marco, I'm actually really struggling today because blah, 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 most people are so generous and they're saying, "Hey, Victor, I'm really sorry to hear that. Is there something that I can do to help you?" So it wasn't until my later years that I really learned to reach out for help and to ask for help. And so that helped shrink the gap as well between public and private. But in my early years, I was just absolutely too frightened to be able to do that because, that will be exposing and what will people think of me and what if I lose my job, blah, blah, blah. All of those types of thoughts were thoughts that I had in younger periods of my time until, I really sort of matured as a person.
Because often the performance remains visible, but the cost of producing it stays private, right?
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
thing. And what makes this particularly difficult, in my opinion, for organizations is that the person can still be delivering, as you did. The
Mm-hmm.
team may still be engaged, work may still be moving, numbers look respectable. So the system reads or founder the performance as evidence that everything is working fine, right? But sometimes the performance is only evidence that one person is compensating and absorbing extremely well, like you did.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to give my former boss credit for this because every week as a leadership team, she would ask us, Marco, red, amber, green, how are you doing at work? And red, amber, green, how are you doing in life? And I think that how are you doing in life part is like absolutely critical. Yes, there needs to be enough psychological safety so your people are willing to share how they're doing in life. But that for me was, a really simple way to know if they're high performing and high functioning, but the cost is adding up over here on the life side. And so, I think that something like that is absolutely critical if you want to actually care about your people and look after your people rather than just, talking about it, having actual structural mechanisms to do that. And so my version of that with my people were I would have one-on-ones with them every week and I would just ask them to talk about whatever was most important to them during that time. And I would look at them as people and say, Marco, how do I help you become a better version of yourself? What does 2.0 version of you look like? And for most people, so many of those conversations were not work related at all. One guy wanted to build his own hedge fund. Another guy was recovering from cancer and he had a different outlook on life. Other people, their focus was on their kids. And so, I think as leaders, we can really take the opportunity to get to know people much better as people rather than just employees and outcomes. And I think that is actually a key antidote in terms of recognizing when the cost in private is adding up. Because if you have a torch and you have visibility over it, then at least you know what's happening. You can actually do something about it.
So in a way, in a lot of ways, someone can begin living organization internally long before they actually resign, right? And it happens often. So is there a good point where a good leader shifts from building the future to simply surviving the week, in your opinion, right? Because the resignation may look sudden to the company, but for the person, it may be the final closure of a decision they have or that has been reopening for years, right? What could a leader above you have asked that maybe would, in a way, that might have revealed what was actually happening earlier? And would you even have answered honestly at the time?
Yeah. So this probably ties in really neatly to my previous response because I've had, different types of leaders along my path. I've worked at maybe 6 or 7 companies and lots of changes in leadership during the time. And when I reflect back on my leaders, some of them, actually most of them are very, very focused on work in terms of the work outcomes, in terms of the KPIs, in terms of what I was delivering and what challenges I was having at work and how I could remove those challenges. And I think it really is as simple as spending time with your people and asking about how they're going outside of work. For my previous people leader, that was, hey, red, amber, green on life, in addition to red, amber, green at work. My version of that was, hey, Marco, what's happening for you this week? And it was just building the relationship over time. And when I first started doing that, my team weren't used to that. Their previous people leader didn't have those regular one-on-ones with them. And so when I started doing it, they're like, hey, this is like over engagement. This is like too much engagement. And so they didn't open up about what was happening in their personal private lives until, a little bit further down the track, once they sort of realized, hey, I can actually kind of trust this guy. And when I talk about things that are outside of work, he's actually helping me with those things as well. And so I look back at my experiences and I would say the same thing. The leaders who took an interest in who I was as a person, I would open up to them and say what was really going on a lot quicker than if I didn't have that relationship at a personal kind of level.
Yeah, for sure. And to chime in on this one, for CEOs listening and leaders, managers, I feel that the lesson is not to start diagnosing everybody or turning every one-to-one into therapy, right? We don't want it. It may be simpler. Do I know what this person is carrying that the structure is not carrying? Does that distinction make sense to you?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally, it's even simpler than, do I know what this person is carrying that the structure is not carrying? It's really as simple as, hey, Marco, how was your weekend? And actually caring about how Marco's weekend was. Like, what did Marco spend the weekend doing? Who did he spend it with? What is his wife's name? Does he have kids? Does he go to the beach? Like, does he play football? Does he take his kids out to sporting events? Like, just listening and being genuinely curious about, hey, how is Marco actually going at a personal level? And I think that's as simple as it needs to be. I remember back when I was I was a senior analyst at the time, and the GM, which is the equivalent of VP. I was there late one night, and his name was Royce, and Royce just said to me, "Hey, Victor, tell me about your background." And it was the first time I had had that type of conversation with him, because previous meetings, it's only like, very formal type big decisions that I would see Royce. And I started telling him about my work background, because I thought that's what he was asking about. He's like, yeah, great, but no, tell me about you as a person. Like, what's your heritage? What's your culture like? What's keeping you here at 7 p.m. at night? So he just spent maybe about half an hour just chatting to me and getting to know me as a person. And so I think as leaders or CEOs, sometimes we can forget that underneath the worker is actually a human being as well. And if we get to know the human being, we're going to be able to get to know them so much more as a person, not just a worker. And it's not to do therapy or anything with them, but it's just to genuinely connect with them as an individual human being, just like you are.
And when did leaving corporate first become a real possibility for you, not just a bad day fantasy?
Yeah, so for me, the last time in terms of leaving corporate, I was in a unique situation where I was on a project which was due to run for about 3 years. And I knew that after that project, there was not going to be a role for me. So I kind of knew when I had signed up for that role that that's what was going to happen. And for me, I started one of your earlier questions about, how do you know when to build for the future versus just surviving the week? Because I knew that was happening, it was about a year out from when I knew the role was going to finish that I started focusing on, hey, what is life going to be like after this role? Am I going to stay in corporate and look for my next corporate role? Or do I want to do something on my own? And for me, it was a very personal decision. And this was at the time where Luna was quite young. So Luna would have been in her first maybe 6 months at that time. And I just thought to myself, hey, I'm really into this Montessori education, which is private tuition in Australia. So I really liked it. And I'm like, hey, so if I want to do that, in Europe, it's much more subsidized. In Australia, it's basically private education. So it's like, it's about US dollars, maybe about 10 to 12,000 US. And my wife, Linda, and we hadn't been on holidays for a while. It's been like 10 years since our last overseas vacation. I don't know. In Germany, you probably get to travel a lot. In Australia, we're kind of like in this one country. So to go out costs a bit more money. And so I'm like, we want to do some more traveling. I'm like, hey, that's another 5,000-6,000 in US dollars. And I'm like, I really enjoy the personal development type things as well. So that's another $3,000-4,000. And I'm like, hey, so now I have a $20,000 gap in terms of where I want my life to be versus where my life is now. And I thought, how am I going to solve for this? I can go and find another corporate job which pays more, or I can start leaning back on my entrepreneurial space, which is what I did 10 years ago. And so that's where I decided to, for the future of my family, basically, for Linda and Luna, to have greater flexibility and a different type of lifestyle, that's what I wanted to do. And so that was a real 12-month timeline in terms of getting that up and running. And I was doing that in parallel to my corporate job. So it's not like, a decision that I made overnight. And there was a really strong purpose and a really strong why behind it. So if people are out there considering making such a move, my greatest encouragement would be, start whilst you have a job in corporate, start whilst you have that safety net. Because if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, you have food and shelter. And then after that, it's safety and security. And so if you have that financial security, it makes it a lot easier to go up the different hierarchies of needs and to do other things. Whereas if you're out of the job, then all of a sudden safety and security is missing. And so you're just thinking about, how do I survive the next week, the next month? And then your mind will always go to, the fastest way to survive is to get another job. And there's nothing right or wrong about another job, but it might be misaligned to what you actually want to do, which was the root cause for so many of my burnouts.
Yeah. Was there any fear? Were you afraid you might lose some things if you left corporate?
Yeah. There was a lot of fear. The biggest fear was just a loss of identity. I had spent 18 years inside of corporate. And when I actually made the decision in my mind, and when the redundancies actually came through, there was a lot of grief, actually, because what I was grieving was the loss of that corporate identity, because I had put so many hours into it. So much of my time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears had gone into that. This is the corporate version of Victor. And the fear was, if I'm not that person anymore, then who am I now? And so there was a real almost not as extreme as an existential crisis, but it was just as it was a real shock to the system and the nervous system. And, the big fears, of course, were money as well, because, if you don't have a working income from corporate, then the fear is, that safety and security, like what if what I decide to do outside doesn't work? So there's a very real and, logical fears.
And a lot of confidence is connected to being good inside a certain environment, right?
Yeah. The confidence and the certainty that being in that environment gives you, because you've just been doing it for so long. And, I always knew that if I wanted to stay in corporate, I could do it very, very easily, just because I spent so much time in there. And so for me, the question was, do I want to do something that's easy to do and steady and secure, or do I, and this sounds a little bit cliche, or do I want to, follow my dreams and do what is actually fulfilling for me? And again, no right or wrong answer, but that was the right answer for me.
Did you ever wonder whether you had made the wrong decision, maybe? What did freedom feel like before it started feeling good?
Yeah. So did I ever wonder if I made the right decision? Yes. And before freedom felt good, it felt like a lot of work. And it still feels like a lot of work, to be fair. So, for me, it was when the work was happening and a lot of work was happening and I wasn't seeing the outcomes that I wanted to see. That's where, I would question myself. It's like, oh, have I bitten off more than I can chew? Like, is this actually going to work? So the self-doubt definitely creeps in, and the what ifs definitely creep in. And that's where I think it's so important that you have an actual support network, and other people who are on a similar journey to you. Because when I was, really into the corporate kind of lifestyle, I didn't have a big community of entrepreneurs and founders and other people that were in that kind of space. And so if you don't have that support system and those other people to talk to, it can be a really, really lonely journey. And when you're really lonely, then that doubt and those fears can then, sort of take over because there isn't a pressure release. The environment in a positive way of people that would help you with that might not necessarily be there. So I was fortunate, really, really fortunate that, I found groups and tribes of people who were on very, very similar journeys to me.
You describe yourself as deadpreneur now, and I imagine becoming a father changes the calculation because time stops being an abstract resource, right? You begin seeing what your work is costing in moments, attention, and presence with your daughter specifically. So how did fatherhood change your definition of success?
So I think the biggest thing was it stopped being about work and it stopped being about work outcomes. Um, and as much as, I'd love to be able to say, being in a relationship, being married had that same difference. It sort of didn't have the same difference. And I'm sort of thinking about why. And I think when I became a dad, I think the difference was now I'm 50% wholly responsible between myself and my wife, Linda, who has been tremendously supportive on my journey. I'm 50% responsible for the life and death, literally the life and death of another human being. And I think that just puts everything else into context. The 10 p.m. email at night, can that actually wait till the next day? Yes, it can. Whereas before becoming a dad, I'm like, yeah, 10 p.m. It's going to take me 5 minutes. It's going to be helpful. Let's send that 10 p.m. email out. Whereas it became, hey, 10 p.m. Frankly, let's get some more sleep. That's going to make a bigger difference to my day than sending out the email at 10 p.m. at night. So what mattered changed.
What I usually tell CEOs, leaders, senior executives is, especially when we come to, let's say, negotiation of prices and so on. The thing is, CEOs and seniors usually, let's say their rate is 200, 300, 400 USD per hour, right? But that's during their work hours. How much does 1 hour cost you when you're with your kid on kid's birthday or you're watching a match? This one email, right? This stepping outside of the room when there's a celebration of your daughter's second birthday, right? It's not 400 USD anymore. It's a lot more. So this one bottleneck that one small fire that you keep, that you help controlling for years, right? One email, one quick call is 1 hour of time that you won't get back, right? I mean, we never get our time back, but some time is more valuable than office hours, right? And then if you get used to handling these small bottlenecks from your team, or just because the ownership is not clear in the company, you get used to it. You miss kids' birthdays, trainings. You are stepping out of the room when you have family dinner, right? And then it's not 400 USD anymore. It's more and more and more. That's what people underestimate, right?
What I think of is, yes, there's absolutely a cost, like, missing out your daughter's second birthday when the cake comes and you sing happy birthday together. But I also think better decision making and delegation and empowering your people also turns that into a reward. Because things run smoothly, then that means you're able to have the peace of mind to spend that, one extra hour at that birthday party or whatever it might be, with a clear conscience and know that everything's going to be okay. So in addition to the pain and the hour you don't get back, it's also in itself a direct reward of having the right decision-making mechanisms in place in your organization.
Exactly. That's when I stepped into leadership role. That was the hardest lesson for me in a way, because all of us who step in at certain roles or step up in career are most of the time either good networkers or excellent solo performers, right? And if you're a really good individual performer, you're not so good at delegating. You have the mentality, I will sort it out, right? So
Yeah.
first time when I stepped in leading a global team, the problem was, when I would see something simple for myself, although it wasn't simple for my team, I would absorb it. I would take it on myself. And then you don't delegate. Your team is not growing and you become a bottleneck long term. So this was the hardest lesson for me to actually, and biggest leadership lesson, to learn how to delegate better, and that, I don't have to be superhero all the time, right? Because you're hurting yourself and you're hurting your team, right?
Yeah, completely agree. As an individual contributor, and I was an individual contributor for many, many years, you kind of get used to, hey, because you're the individual contributor, you're the one that's solving all of the problems because you don't have a team to get to delegate to. And so it's kind of like a muscle that you need to learn to let go of and learn how to delegate. And, especially with technical people, it can be such an easy trap to fall into. And as you mentioned, learning that skill and the cost involved, I think is a great way to realize what it is actually costing you and what the impact is.
Because people talk about work-life balance in a very clean way nowadays, but you can physically be at home and still be mentally inside a company, right? Or inside tomorrow's meeting. Did you experience that a lot?
Yeah, a lot, more than I would like to admit. Because what I would do in the daytime is, I would help my team solve their problems. And then I would do my individual contributor work that only I could do because my team wasn't able to in the evenings. And so, the work day never, completely ended. And I got to a point where I'm like, I actually don't believe in work-life balance anymore, but I do believe in life-work integration. And what that integration looks like can be very, very different for different people. So for me, for example, I'm not in corporate anymore, but I will go to the beach roughly between 12 to 2 to 3 p.m. each day. And so that's my time to work on my own self-care routine. And that's how I integrate my own sort of life bit into my work. So, for different people, that's going to look different. Most nights, most weeks I'll work 6 or 7 days a week, but it's not every hour on Saturdays and Sundays. And most of the time, because my clients are international, they're in Europe and the US. And so in Australia, like the time zones are just really wonky. So, I will have calls 7 a.m. in the morning. I'll have calls 11 p.m. at night. And then so for me, I just had to work out, how do I distribute the day in a way that makes sense for me whilst I can still keep running the business. And so I think the life work integration is actually really important because, as you mentioned, a lot of the time you can take the work with you to the next day or take it home with you. And it's a case of, how do you integrate into your life? Like not everyone can just flick a switch and switch off. And I'm kind of one of those examples. It's very hard for me to just say dunk and say, hey, that's gone. So I made a different decision, which was how do I integrate both sides together?
Yeah. And for people in corporate in general, a bigger title can increase your options inside the system while reducing your freedom outside, right? As you experience, which is uncomfortable trade in a lot of ways. So I want to make important distinction here. Not everyone listening needs to leave corporate, right? Some people need a different manager. Some need a different role. Some need clearer boundaries, maybe. And some need real authority, right? And some probably do need to leave the company. I mean, there is no, I don't have a magic silver bullet for this. But when you're exhausted, every problem can start looking like an exit problem, right? That's the thing. And then, in your opinion, how can someone tell whether they need to leave the organization or corporate, or whether something inside their role could still be repaired?
Yeah, so for me, it really comes back down to alignment. So if the role itself fits who you are as a person, then that's something that's repairable. But if the role is something that is just not who you are as a person, so let me think of the cleanest example that I can think of. My very first job, I was a graduate at a management consulting company called Accenture. And so I was an IT grad. So coming out of IT, essentially is, kind of top tier in terms of where you can land yourself as a first job. And who I was I was someone that didn't drink. I wasn't a party goer. I wasn't overly social at that time. I am still quite introverted even now. And so Accenture and most big four consulting companies, for example, have very much a play hard, work hard, play hard kind of culture. And so that drinking, playing hard, going out at nights, that wasn't aligned to who I was as a person. And so for me, it just wasn't the right fit. And it wasn't until a long time afterwards that I kind of realized that. And so that for me would have been, hey, it's not the right organization, or it's not the kind of right lifestyle. And everyone else in the organization, most of the people are sort of built the same way. So it's not a place that I would feel a sense of belonging and would work for me in the long run, unless I wanted to change to be more aligned to that overall kind of culture. So for me, it comes down to simple alignment, who you are as a person, and then comparing that to the role and then the organization. And even within an organization, especially large organizations, a lot of the time, if you just move to another team, that other team and their subculture could completely align with who you are as a person. And so it's more about finding, where is the best environment for who you are as a person, as an individual. So I think that for me is the biggest test.
Yeah, for sure, because it in a lot of ways, for the person listening who is caring a lot, still performing, and let's say quietly wondering how long can they continue like this, what is the honest question they need to ask themselves?
I think the best question is, if I were to keep doing this for the next 5 years, what is life going to look like?
That's a very good place to leave it. Victor, thank you. I appreciate how honestly you spoke about both sides of this, organizational side and human family side, because companies can talk about empowerment, ownership, and resilience very easily, and often they do, right? But the real test is what happens when a decision carries consequences, and who is left holding these consequences afterwards and bringing them home. So this is the biggest takeaway. So thank you a lot for joining me here. Where is the best place for people to find you in general and follow your work?
Yeah, best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So if you type in my name, Victor, and then Trieu, Trieu on LinkedIn. As far as I know, I'm the only Victor Trieu on LinkedIn. So you'll find me pretty quickly over there, and I'm sure there'll be a link in the right place as well. So really grateful for spending the time with you today, Marco. I hope the coming soon in terms of being a dad as well happens for you sooner rather than later. And it's been such a privilege to have this conversation with you.